Thank you all for coming. We're going to get started here. We're going to be talking today about analytics in the sports industry, and we have a couple of speakers for our panel today. First off is Benjamin Alomar. Dr. Ben Alomar is the Director of Production and Analytics at ESPN. Prior to ESPN, Ben had worked as a professor of sports management at Menlo College. Sports analytics consultant, researcher, and author of Sports Analytics, a guide for coaches, managers, and other decision makers. He also consulted with a variety of teams in the NFL and the NBA, including 5 seasons with the Oklahoma City Thunder, Cleveland Cavaliers, and with a variety of companies in sports analytics. He was involved in the Russell Westbrook draft by Oklahoma Thunder. He has published numerous research studies in sports analytics and has written on sports analytics for outlets such as ESPN, Analytics Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Additionally, Ben is the founding editor of the Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sports, the first peer-reviewed academic journal for research in sports analytics. Ben? Next we have is Samantha Rudolph. Sam is an executive consultant at Forward Direction Group, which is a sports media and technology company. Her consulting expertise, including leveraging sports content experience to tie into the business end of new product development, sports data, and emerging video technologies and distribution mechanisms, with a focus on the changing landscape of the sports and entertainment industry. Before joining Forward Direction Group, Sam worked at ESPN for nearly a decade in the sales and marketing and content divisions. Sam founded the pregame area of ESPN's stats and analysis team, the group responsible for live scores and stats across the platforms. She produced ESPN's creative staging for 3 days of live television from the floor of the Consumer Electronics Show, focusing on the company's big picture and brand while coordinating the associated myriad of details. A Wharton grad, she specializes in project management, budgetary oversight, plus strategic and creative thinking. Sam? Next we have is Kim Weller. Kim is the Senior Director of Analytics and Data Strategy for ESPN's Research and Analytics Group. She and her team are responsible for optimizing the collection, organization, and utilization of ESPN's digital audience and behavior data for ESPN's wide-ranging digital media platforms. Kim joined ESPN in March of 2010 from SAS, where she was a product manager in the consumer intelligence practice. This is a return trip to the Walt Disney Company for Kim. She joined Walt Disney World's marketing finance team in 1999 and became part of the Walt Disney Parks and Resorts Online when it was created in 2001. Kim spent over 5 years at Disney analyzing a spectrum of websites focused on travel planning, e-commerce, content, and lead generation for the happiest places on earth. Kim holds an MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. And last but not least, we have Kevin Whitner. Kevin is an account director at Insight and Strategy at Octagon. Since joining Octagon in 2011, Kevin's responsibilities have included leveraging Octagon's proprietary tools to meet the needs of its blue chip client list, which includes Delta, Sprint, AB InBev, MasterCard, Bank of America, Allstate, and Coca-Cola. For these clients, Kevin directs and analyzes primary research, creates ROI and ROI measurement tools, and leads Octagon's sponsorship evaluation offering. Kevin, who holds a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Arizona, recently led the day-to-day management of Octagon's Passion Shift Research Initiative, which quantifies how fans are consuming their favorite sports. Kevin. My name is Phil Santonacito. I work for Creative Partners based out of Stanford. I run their digital strategy and business intelligence department. And I'm actually a UNH alumni. Work with Gil and Jed and all these guys. That's why I got roped into this gig. But we're going to start off with some questions now. And we just kind of run down the line, or whoever wants to pick it up can go with it. The first we want to kind of know is how you guys get involved in this particular field of work.
So my sports analytics career was a complete accident. I had a doctoral degree in economics. I was working in public health policy at the University of California, San Francisco on tobacco control policy. And I happened to see an ad on Craigslist for a part-time job at a startup fantasy sports company. And I grew up in Washington, D.C., and at the time there was no baseball team there. I never knew anything about baseball or Bill James or anything like that. And I called this company and said, I'm interested, I love sports. They said, all right, well, have you read the book Moneyball? I said, no. I said, well, read it and then come on in for an interview. So I read the book, and as I was reading, I was like, this is what I want to be doing. And so I went in, I started working with them. They wanted me, as my economics background, to help them build a market. They were going to be, they were going to be what daily fantasy sports is today. They were going to basically have a market for players, and you would buy players. It didn't quite work at that time, but in doing so, I got to meet some people that were really early on in getting going in the sports analytics world. Roland Beach was there, who now works for the Dallas Mavericks. Aaron Schatz, who has Football Outsiders. We were charged with developing these advanced metrics in baseball, which I knew very little bit about, and basketball, which I knew something about, but I was very quickly roped into doing a project for the Portland Trail Blazers to develop a model to project draft prospects for different players. As I was doing this, I had a lot of fun doing it, decided that's what I wanted to do. I had this doctoral degree, I was doing research, and I wanted to have an academic career, so to do that I needed to publish. The Trailblazers thought so much of the work we were doing, they allowed us to write about it however we wanted to, and didn't keep it secret, so I wrote about that, and I also started the Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sports, because there was no academic outlet at the time for the kind of work that I was doing for the Trailblazers. Doing all those things, my name got out. I got to meet some people who said, do you want to do this project, or do you want to do that project? I just kept saying yes until I found myself working for the Seattle Supersonics, who became the Oklahoma City Thunder, for 5 years, building their analytics group, and then for the Cleveland Cavaliers for 2 years, building their analytics group. But really, before that very first Craigslist ad, there was a long career in tobacco control policy ahead of me.
I also kind of fell into analytics, and in a lot of ways it found me as opposed to me finding it. I started at ESPN in 2004. I would have bet every penny I had that I was going to be a TV producer, and when breaking news happened, I was going to get the call and run into the studio, and that was my calling. And I was a production assistant there for about 6 months, and one of the supervisors of the PA program came up to me and said, you have this reputation for being really accurate. Have you thought about the research department? And I, like an idiot, said, what is the research department? Really, I was qualified, let me tell you. And I learned about it, and basically they were the people who, at the time especially, made the anchors sound smart. And I said, wow, I'm a know-it-all. This is perfect. I like making people sound smart. Where do I sign up? And so I started out in production research, and then about a year and a half later, I was tipped off that there was a new group starting at ESPN. And I love TV production, but I love startups. And I said, okay, this is fascinating. What is this new department? And ESPN was changing the way that they did live scores and stats. They were selling off a property and then replacing the function internally. And I said, okay, I'm not the person who's going to be charting the stats. That is not my area of expertise. But gee, I think I can put a process around this. I think I can figure out how to streamline this and how to make this work. And so in 2006, I started in the stats and analysis team and kind of steadily progressed in management for a while. My last role in stats was trying to integrate some of the really cool stats that the really smart statisticians were doing into some new technologies. And as you've probably figured out, I like startups, I like new technologies. So I really kind of gravitated a little bit more away from the stats and analytics towards the technology. I left ESPN about 18 months ago, and I've been a consultant ever since. And I thought, my gosh, everyone's going to want to hear all about my experience in new technologies and process and operations. And no, they cared about my stats background. So I've been advising people, startups and stats. I've been advising private equity firms looking to make some moves in that space and try to understand what the industry looks like, what the landscape looks like. And so I'm kind of the accidental analytics person.
So I got my start in media relations and public relations in sports, first with the University of Arizona, working across its teams, but primarily with its softball team. And when I graduated from school and spent a little bit more time with that university, I went to the Arizona Diamondbacks and worked in their PR department. at that point, I went back to school for an MBA and was trying to determine a way that I could kind of marry the business side of the MBA with my passion and love for sports. And as I'm sure many of you are, you're looking at kind of those jobs either when you're getting out of school or just a couple years after that. And a lot of them are going to be in ticketing or sales and ways that weren't really leveraging the business acumen that you gain. And I found Octagon, which is primarily in corporate consulting. So we, in our role, work across all of our clients in advising them what they should be doing with their sponsorship dollars. So I usually say we do one of three things, or in one of three areas of the sponsorship planning process. Either where should our clients be spending their money in sponsorship, how they should be activating, so what fans care about the sport in terms of why they are consuming the sport and how they're consuming the sport, and then finally helping to measure the return in terms of justifying that spend. So we're usually doing one of those three things, and that was a really good way for me to marry those two together that blends the passion that I personally have for sports with the business world.
Cool. Well, out of college, I was translating Japanese documents for an international research company, so I had a long way to go before I got here. But I went to business school down at the University of Virginia and was recruited by Disney out of there and went into finance. It was back in 2000, 2001 when somebody said, we really need to take a look at these websites. We had like just DisneyWorld.com and DisneyCruise.com. I said, oh, that sounds like something that I would like to do. So that was when I first started into digital analytics. And before long, we were implementing tags all over everything and collecting all kinds of data. So I started off in travel. I moved to retail. But even when I was down at Walt Disney World, I always wanted to work for ESPN. If I didn't have two small children, when Dream Job came up, I think that I would have just quit the company and just gone and auditioned, because I just thought it was just the best thing ever to be able to marry, what you love in sports and what your passion is in analytics. So I was at SAS, which nobody ever leaves except for me, apparently. I was the first person to leave after they were voted the best company in the country to work for. And they were like, really? I was like, yeah, but it's ESPN. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can. They could really associate with that. So I moved up from North Carolina, and I'm in the other research department, which is media research. So I don't do the research on what these guys have done on the sports themselves, but rather on all of our digital properties. So the ESPN app, formerly known as SportsCenter and ScoreCenter and yada yada yada, and then our new website that just rolled out. I'd love to get feedback on that afterwards. And I'm not the product manager, so you can just let it go. I
have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay. Happy to take it. I entered into this area really looking at how do we make our data better so that we can understand how people are using our products. And it's developed into being able to really leverage some of our big data capabilities and be more predictive and address how people are using all of our different mobile and streaming products.
Well, that's kind of a good segue, because I think a lot of people here are kind of interested in how you're using analytics in your job functions, if you kind of want to continue on that thought process.
Oh, sure. So we work with a lot of different groups throughout the company, mainly our product development group, so we can give them tons of feedback on how people are using our mobile apps. Are they crashing? Are they personalizing? How long are they staying? What kind of videos are they watching? Some of the most fun, I can say most fun in this kind of analytical context with these people, but is being able to look at the audiences across all of our Watch ESPN streaming games and just be able to cut that data and who's watching, what teams, what are the key drivers to audience, what's going to be the most predictive, whether it's ranking, time of day that something is on, and we give a lot of feedback both to programming and our product group so that they can they can best design and program for what we need.
So taking it back to that sponsorship planning process, when a company is looking to make an investment where they say we have $10 million burning a hole in our pocket and what should we do with it, hopefully we want to have some rationale for why we would recommend that they invest in, say, the NBA rather than the NFL or the UFC. So trying to understand what the company's objectives are, what they're looking to get out of that partnership is going to be very different from one client to another. So once we've been able to determine what those objectives are, trying to identify analytics that can hopefully predict which property will best deliver on those. So that ultimately, once we've gone out and we have activated that partnership for them, and a year or 5 years has kind of passed, and it's time for AB InBev to renew the NFL or Sprint to renew the NBA, for example, we have a framework in place for us to go back and say, look, this is why you entered into the partnership, and these are the metrics that we hit off on and those that we did not. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll serve as kind of an aggregator of a number of disparate data sources. So whether that's TV ratings or consumption data, digital metrics, any number of places from any number of the agencies that our clients work with, we can pull those together and weave it into a story for whether or not we've hit the objectives or the investment metrics for them to say, yes, this checks the box, it was a good investment, or we need to take a harder look. The one other place that I would say that we use analytics a lot is determining where we should be spending our sponsorship dollars. So Delta, as an example, has 4 hub markets: Atlanta, New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, as well as a number of secondary markets. And how do you determine, if you have a finite pool of money, whether that's $10 million or $20 or $50 million, how much should be allocated to, say, New York? Because the New York people want all the money, the Los Angeles people want all of the money, right? And everybody has the best property. How could you say no to the Dodgers or the Yankees and so on and so forth? But using data to determine how they should be allocating that spend has become very useful, and also gives them a leg to stand on when regional folks pop up and say, we need more money. And say, well, when you look at the revenue that we're generating from passengers coming out of this market, it says that you should be getting 20% of the pie, as a very simplified way of using analytics for budget allocation. And the same could be said for, say, Anheuser-Busch, for which teams they should be investing in when there's 120 across the 4 major leagues that think that they all should be getting renewals or increased spends.
I use analytics a little bit differently. I don't necessarily use them to help me make a decision or to help me advise my clients on how to make a decision. Generally, my clients are the people that have these new metrics or algorithms or analytical tools, and they look to me to help them figure out what to do with them. So sometimes those decisions are quantitatively based, sometimes they're more qualitatively based. It really depends. For instance, this morning I got a call from someone who has a new cycling metric. They can track new things in cycling, and so we had to have a conversation about, what does the market actually look like? Is there an appetite for cycling? How do you plan to use this? Is this just for competitive athletes? Is this for Joe Biker on the street? And so I come at it quite differently, I think, than probably my other 3 fellow panelists. Mine's more looking at it from a business standpoint of the treetop level. Does this really make sense? Is your product properly positioned? And if so, how are you going to sell it? Who are you selling it to? It's kind of more, for lack of a better word, business 101 than it is making kind of high-level decisions of comparing apples to apples or really good spending options in different markets.
So at ESPN Analytics, on the sports side, production analytics, we take complex data sets and turn them into interesting, compelling sports stories. So we look to tell the stories that are really hard and in some ways can't be told without really good data and data analysis. One example of this is, and I'm going to plug our story we have coming out on 5/38 tomorrow, so be sure to check it out. We have a draft model looking at college quarterbacks and how successful they're going to be in the NFL. And for those of you not following every minutia of the NFL draft coming up this week. There are two top quarterbacks, and their question is Mariota going to go number one, or is Jameis Winston going to go number one? Both these guys are thought to be by far the top quarterbacks in the draft, and probably the top players in the draft. So they may go 1 and 2 in the draft. A lot of folks will tell you that, analysts will tell you that Jameis Winston is the best quarterback. There's some on the field, there's some off the field stuff that may cause him to slide down, but really, if you're just focused on the football, he's the guy you want. And so what we did with our draft model is we wanted to take that into account, the opinion of the experts, the analysts, because the scouts are really smart. They really spend a lot of time studying, and they're really good at evaluating certain things. The question we had is, what are they really good at evaluating? And it turns out what they're really good at evaluating when it comes to quarterbacks is their ability to throw the ball. Of all their whole passing game, they're good at evaluating that. And so we can use a scout's grade in our model, and that basically proxies for everything that goes on in the passing game, whether it's interceptions, throwing the ball deep, throwing the ball short, all that accuracy. We tested all those different, with real data, and the scout's grade really does a good job of capturing all of that. What the scout's grade does not necessarily do a good job of capturing is the ability of the quarterback to extend a drive. So not just to run, but to run efficiently. So when they when a quarterback does run, are they picking up first downs all the time? Are they creating opportunities to really advance their team's chances to score on a particular drive? And when you factor that in, that particular piece that scouts apparently don't do a great job of evaluating, then we have a projection model that outperforms the scouts, that can identify the Russell Wilsons of the world as guys who are going to be really strong players in the NFL. From our model, then when we factor all of it in, then Mariota sneaks ahead of Winston. Just a little bit, not a lot, and certainly within the margin of error, but they're really, really close. Interesting part of it is that's not the end of the story for us. The part of it is the level. These guys, neither one of them looks to be a superstar. They look to be good, slightly above average quarterbacks in the NFL, not superstars. Neither one of them is going to be Andrew Luck, at least according to our model. And then the last piece of the story that I find really interesting is that there's only one other quarterback that we project to be a reasonable quarterback, above what we call replacement level quarterback in the NFL, and that's Hundley from UCLA. The rest of them in the draft, they're not going to be productive NFL quarterbacks according to our model. Now, the model's not 100% right. The goal of draft models, particularly in football at this time, is always to just reduce the error. Our information is not perfect. We can't rely on our models 100% of the time. So what we're trying to do is just reduce that failure rate around draft picks. And with that perspective, probably want to go Mariota ahead of Winston, and you definitely want to go Hundley ahead of all the other players, but you don't want to have really high expectations for any of them. So that's kind of the stuff that we do in my group.
I think we can all say that's very, very interesting. I think one of the things that people are actually might be a little bit of a disconnect for them is how management is kind of treating the role of analytics in terms of their decision-making process, in terms of your influence on that whole entire paradigm. Maybe you guys can elaborate on that a little bit.
So in terms of sports decisions?
Yeah, in terms of sports decisions.
It's really interesting. One of the hardest things, general manager's job is really hard. Let me say that. They have to balance all these different types of information that are flowing at them all the time. Whether it's what a scout is saying, what your coach is saying, what I'm saying from an analytics perspective. So it's really hard. But what's happened significantly in the time that I've been working in analytics is the seat at the table for analytics has appeared. It didn't exist 10 years ago. Now it exists, and it's taken very seriously. As long as there's a lot of education around this concept of what analytics does. Analytics is not supposed to run your team. It's not supposed to replace scouts. In fact, it's supposed to work with scouts to get better and get, what I do gets better by working with scouts, and what scouts can do will get better by working with analytics. So when it comes to general manager, now they have to sort of weigh and say, well, analytics is really strongly saying we should do this. Scouts are saying we should do that. How do they make that decision? That's really unique to each general manager and their decision-making process. But The best analytics can hope for from our perspective is that we're heard, we're thought, that it's taken into account, and eventually sometimes we win and we have a real voice in the decision making. But it's an evolving process because the field is so new, and general managers are just starting to learn how to trust the process and trust the models and the data that's coming at them.
You kind of touched on this briefly before, Sam, with your cyclist example, but how are your clients and people you're working with kind of treating, analytics from a managerial and finance perspective,
Sure.
and how you're helping to guide that process?
I will say that it's a very hot investment property right now. The private equity firm, the management consulting companies loves different analytics companies. They're fascinated by it. And they don't really understand the space. That's a generalization. I'm not trying to insult anyone. But a lot of it, for those types of clients, is hand-holding, trying to understand who the players are, even how basic stats work and how they get from whatever company it is, be it the teams, the leagues, the media outlets, to the consumer. It's very basic. So that's kind of one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is obviously the startups themselves. And when you own a startup and you run a startup, you are passionate about your idea. You're not doing it. I mean, some of these people are literally eating ramen noodles morning, noon, and night trying to push their idea along. And so it's sometimes hard to talk to them about the realities of what their algorithm is or isn't or maybe or could be or who their market is. That's kind of the really amazing part and the really challenging part of working with startups is that these people are passionate, they have wonderful ideas, they understand their tool better than anyone else, but they can't always see the shortcomings and some of the realistic obstacles that they're facing.
Kevin, you talked about, looking at the different hubs for Delta and how they're kind of assigning based upon whatever the valuation is. Like, does management tend to go along empirically with those decisions, or?
So it's funny, when Ben was talking about kind of the role that analytics has on the player side, there's a nice parallel between kind of the scouts mindset compared to the analytics mindset when it comes to player personnel decisions, as well as with what we do. So if you kind of, using that analogy, use the scouts as kind of the old boys club, we're going to bang out this deal over a glass of your favorite beverage, to determine whether or not we should be investing in a certain property, and we have a term called execu-win, which whatever the CEO's favorite sport is, or whatever he or she is passionate about is what you invest in, is kind of the old way of doing things. Now, where there needs to be some accountability for the way that you're investing, that's where analytics comes in, and that's where Octagon has really planted a flag and said, we're not just going to kind of take a quick pulse of where we think you should go, but we're going to have a sound and reasoned approach and a plan for why you should be investing your dollars where you are, as well as a plan for how we're going to measure how you did so we can make adjustments on the fly and make better decisions next time. So I think that's really the key, is that trying to as a company, trying to differentiate ourselves and say that we're not just going to do things the old way. We're going to make smart business decisions and have a seat at the table on the strategy side, rather than just be the sports marketing agency that can go out and activate your property. Because we have those people, kind of the old scouts, if you will, who have done more MLB deals and NBA deals than anybody else and know the ins and outs. But if we can arm those people with the analytics behind whether it's making a better deal or making smarter business decisions, that's what we're trying to do.
Similar kind of framework for you, Kim, and you're managing all these different properties, the different apps, and looking at crash rates. How does management kind of treat your role in?
Well, it depends on the management. Some people, we're still, like you were saying about having a seat at the table. I think at this point, the media research department definitely has a seat at the table, whether it's with sales and marketing or product. Your message doesn't always necessarily get through, but at least you've put the intelligence out there. One of the cool things about digital analytics, though, is that we have the ability to test and change very quickly, and have a lot of learning along the way. Actually, 538, that Nate Silver is a good friend to all analytics at ESPN, and we have some technology that allows us to do A/B and multivariate testing on our websites and mobile apps, and they're actually not only embracing the technology but now writing about it. So we're able to test different storylines, layouts, and we do this in other areas too. But they've really whereas some other areas may have a little bit more, I don't know, themselves invested in the design, maybe too much to want to know whether it's could be better or not. They just want to optimize and know the answer and understand the technology that we're using in order to help. So it really is a spectrum, but we just keep putting things forth as people will consume it.
No, I think, you know, analytics is one of this thing where there's tons of information out there, and there's obviously a ton of that you can kind of do with it. I think a lot of people might be curious as to where you might see this type of industry segment start moving forward. What do you envision the future is going to happen with analytics?
So I think technology is driving a sort of a new wave in sports analytics, which is player tracking data. This is a type of data in which everything that moves on the court or the field gets tracked. In the NBA, this is a company called Stats does this, and they use 6 cameras above the court, and they track everything that moves. They give you the X and Y coordinate of everything that moves 25 times a second, and they give you the X and Y Z coordinate of the ball. And so you have this massive amount of data that is fundamentally different from everything else that sports analytics has dealt with before. If you want to think about it, play-by-play data, which was was the best thing we had before player tracking data. One line of play-by-play data has some information in it. You can read that one line and understand something that's happened during that game. Player tracking data, you read one line of player tracking data, it's totally meaningless. It has zero information in just that one point. The massive amount of it, one game of player tracking data, there's a huge amount of information there, but it's a lot harder to unlock than it is in play-by-play data. And this is the kind of data that is coming across all sports. The NFL is testing a system like this. Instead of cameras, they use chips in players' shoulder pads. There are different systems that are used in college basketball is using. There are some people testing it in college football. Baseball has it. Rugby, Australian rules football, soccer. It's everywhere, and it's causing a really a fundamental shift in what is possible out of sports analytics. And therefore, because what's possible is changing, the demands on us is changing, and the demands of the people working in sports analytics is changing. Used to be if you were pretty good with Excel, you could go pretty far. That's simply not the case anymore. Now the best people in sports analytics have doctoral degrees in computer science, and have that kind of skill level to be able to determine patterns and determine from this massive ream of data whether LeBron James went over or under a pick when he was playing defense against John Wall or something. So those are it's a massive shift, and it's a massive sort of new investment that's needed in sports analytics to really unlock all of the exciting information that exists in these new data sets.
Okay.
Down the line.
Sure. So something that really fascinates me about the future of analytics is the application beyond professional sports. Certainly there are so many different directions and new things to measure, and certainly I'm not the right person to really comment on them. But what I find fascinating are the companies that have developed a product that can be used in Major League Baseball, but also scales down to kids in Little League so that they can compare themselves against their opponents, so that high school coaches have a more solidified way of tracking them and comparing them. Same with college, and kind of seeing the scale there. There's a company that's developed what they call the physical SAT. And that to me is fascinating, because that's just such a different and wider market that hasn't really been tapped yet, that I think that's something, personally, I'm keeping an eye on.
So one thing we're always interested in is how are fans consuming sports, and what is going to make them want to engage with the brand that has paid for these rights to, have the right to speak to them about their favorite team or league or property. And right now, so much of that data is based on self-reported information. So, how much do you like baseball? Oh, I like it on a 7 out of 10 scale. How often are you watching games? Well, I watch 3 Red Sox games a week. And it's so much of it self-reported, and then we'll take some information, say from the property side that says, well, we have this many Twitter followers, and on average our Instagram posts have this many likes. And a lot of times we are really trying to force what that story is. And I think as time goes on, we'll have more information that really tells us how fans are consuming, so that brands can speak to them in their language and in a way that is really meaningful to them, so that fans can see the value that the brands are bringing when they are, sponsoring a team or their, whatever their favorite property is. So I think the more real information and more real-time information that we have, the better that conversation is going to be between the fan, the brand, and the team.
And in media, where things are going now is beyond just a single point of interaction with, say, ESPN, whether it's an app, a website, or whether you're actually viewing a linear network. We're trying to understand how that all works together in a cross-platform environment. So, because we're motivated to do it because we want to drive the media industry forward. We see there's been ratings data forever, and it's a very simple, elegant way of measuring audience and being able to transact. Digital data gets really, really messy. So when you try to put those things together, it's pretty difficult. So, but that's what we're driven to do, because we have a really good story to tell about that. We have a lot of interactions on all of our platforms, and we want to be able to, in a place where we're trying to get advertising dollars, be able to sell that and be able to give intelligence to our advertisers about which platform or a combination of which platforms is the best for them at any given time.
And that's the sort of information that we're starting to see, that kind of the marriage together is, okay, we know that, say, the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight is coming up on Saturday, and I'm sure Nielsen can come out and say that from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. on Saturday night and Sunday morning, this many tweets were, sent out with these hashtags and these kind of, social metrics. But what do we know about those fans, what they're doing today? What do we know about how they're planning their party, or who they're talking with on a social level for what they should be doing on that Saturday night, on the lead up to the fight, after the fight, whether it's for social reasons or what we call utility reasons in terms of the kind of the statistical reasons for that. And the more information we have on that, whether it's from a rights holder, a content provider, or anyone else, I think bringing all of that information together and weaving it into a story that tells better decisions is ultimately what we're after.
And I can even speak from our side of the fence in terms of our marketing, and we do a lot of creative stuff, is compiling all that information to create that story that you're talking about, and then put contextual messages in front of those individuals as you're building that narrative is definitely, even on our side of the fence, something that's of a great opportunity, I think, for a lot of parties. I think one question is that everybody here might be thinking about is, you each represent very different verticals within the sports analytics segments. What are some qualifications that you would kind of look at individuals that might be wanting to get into that field, or what recommendations might you make to them?
So I started with this already. I think the skills that we're looking for in our group are the ability to work with large amounts of data, so you can program around SQL and other kinds of data management languages. You can do advanced statistical analysis. R is a great language to learn if you have any interest in statistics. And also to have really a good understanding of what's happened already in sports analytics. I interview a lot of people who have great skills, and they have a stated passion for sports analytics and they really want to get involved, but they haven't read any of the major pieces of work that's been done. There's one of the most basic books, basic is not the right word, one of the first books in basketball analytics was written by my predecessor at ESPN, Dean Oliver. It's called Basketball on Paper. It's a great book, I highly recommend it. Dean is a famous graduate of Caltech, played basketball at Caltech. A Caltech basketball player wanted a job with me, and I was talking, and I said, well, have you read Basketball on Paper? Assuming the answer was, well, of course, because our coach insists that we read it. Had never heard of it. So it shows a general lack of understanding of some of the basic concepts that we use every day in basketball analysis. So to understand, there's been quite a bit of research now in sports analytics to understand it and then be able to think carefully and critically on how to apply that and move it forward. Instead of thinking that you've invented something great and brilliant, understand that there's been a lot of work that's come ahead of you, and you need to understand it so you can advance that work and not come in cold just because you have some skills. Those are the kinds of things, advanced statistical analysis, data management, and in ESPN in particular, the ability to understand what good stories are. Can you identify interesting stories within the data that our fans are going to care about? Because that's the primary driver for us, is we want to help our fans understand the games better and tell them things that they wouldn't have been able to understand in any other way other than through our analysis.
So obviously, as a consultant, you generally need experience before you can consult. Otherwise, they don't really pay you very much for your opinions. So I haven't done much hiring of entry-level candidates over the last 18 months. But while I was at ESPN, I oversaw the hiring for all of the entry-level and internships for stats and information. So one thing that we always looked for, that I believe is still the case, is the ability to tell the story through the numbers. You heard that a lot from different panelists today, and I will say it is a phrase that I believe is relatively new, in that it's not something people focused on across industries. And it's such an important skill, and it's something you can demonstrate in the interview. It's something you can demonstrate almost on your resume, is this skill set. And you can do it in a variety of ways. There's not kind of one path to do it. But one of the commonalities here is that you need to understand the analytics, but you need to kind of spin them forward in whatever way you're doing it. And showing that you can do that is such a valuable skill that I don't think many entry-level employees learn to articulate, even if they have that skill set. So really being able to provide tangible examples of how you've done that, trying to figure out, okay, what is the crux of this job, whatever the job happens to be, and how can I show concrete examples that I've thought through what is actually entailed, and that I have the skills and background to do it, even if they're not a direct one-to-one comparison, I think will go a long way towards impressing the hiring manager.
It's pretty well said. That took about half of what I wanted to say. So, that's all right. That's what I get for going third on this question. So most of the time when I'm speaking with students and this question comes up, it's not to a group that is analytically inclined per se. And the answer is usually that you need to do something that differentiates yourself, because saying that you are the biggest sports fan in the world and you won your fantasy baseball league, I'm not saying that to demean anyone, and that you're willing to work hard, those are all good things, but it's not quite enough. So if you have a hard, tangible skill set, whether that is knowing Excel inside and out, that may not get you to the top of the analytics pyramid, but that's a differentiating skill. If it's not just being proficient in PowerPoint, but being able to take information and really weave it into a story in a deck that is client ready, that is something else. So I think it depends on what you want to do in terms of just how much kind of analytical rigor you need to have. But if you can, whether it's SAS or R, or SPSS, kind of be able to check that box, be able to check the box on all of those things that we know that you can come in and at the very least be a utility player for us. And then on the other hand, if there's something else that you have that can really differentiate you, whether it's in the digital space or in, I know this probably isn't the room for it, but graphic design, something else that can take that story and push it forward is ultimately what we're after. Because I'm sure anyone who's hired here on this panel has heard, I love sports and I am, willing to work hard. The next thing that we hear is, I love data and I love finding the story, is probably kind of the thing that you hear from everyone now. The same way that you will probably hear that culture is my favorite part of the company and I love the people, right? When you're talking to the hiring people about why they love their company. So if you can check those boxes, but then push that forward and say, look, I can take that information and actually tell a story with it that is going to make your clients look smarter or make your ESPN look smarter to fans in a way that fans appreciate that information, will come back. That's what we're looking for. And by the way, we are hiring. So
I just got through a very rigorous intern selection process where we had about 500 applicants for each position that we had open. It was insanely difficult, but what it ended up coming down to was that we had people with a lot of very good statistical background, and they emanated curiosity. That was great. Now it came down to 2 people for this one particular position, and it was so hard. One of them actually had digital analytics experience. You don't actually see that very much, like experience with the tools and understanding of the data, especially in somebody that is an undergrad. We use Adobe's Omniture tool, and he hadn't even put it on his resume initially, but then was able to talk about it, and I was like, you really need to put this on your resume because it's very hard to find people with that skill set. So that was the differentiating factor for that person. But I would definitely say for my group, it's an attention to detail, and it's funny to say this, but the most valuable person on my team's favorite sport is like Dancing with the Stars. I mean, she's actually not even that much of a sports fan, but she loves media. And she's just insanely good at what she does and is able to communicate very, very well, both to her team and to all of our clients. And it's absolutely key.
A lot of tools were kind of mentioned, like SPSS data, SQL, all these different things. There's another tool that I've actually found very, very valuable in terms of telling that story, and it's called Tableau. And if you're using like Excel and you're kind of getting used to using like fields to try to do some information mining, you can use something like Tableau that really helps you develop that narrative. And so you can actually pull in lots of different information, play around with it. And there's actually a free license for all you guys too, because you're students. So you can just go to tableau.com. You can download the student copy and kind of get your hands wet. But you can do some fairly complicated statistical analysis in it, but it's also very visually intuitive. So it's kind of a really nice way of getting your feet wet with all that type of information. Just something else to kind of keep in mind too.
We use Tableau extensively in our group. I mean, the way to think about it is it's a massive pivot table with a lot of visualizations, and like you said, it's great. It's got an R integration,
It's really cool stuff. They've got a lot of APIs and stuff like that. And I've spoken at a couple of the conferences with Tableau out in California, and it's a neat company. There's a reason why they went public. Anyways, is there anything else that our panelists kind of like to add?
One thing is to really just do something. We've all talked about people tell us how passionate they are about sports and data, and I go to the MIT Sports Analytics Conference every year, and I could spend the entire time talking to students there. Not a problem. Almost none of them have actually tried to answer any question with data in sports. It's amazing. People who are, seniors at MIT graduating, and telling me that all they want to do is have a career working in sports analytics, have not done one research paper in the field. The people that I have hired, that I've met, the students that have always impressed me, are the ones that hand me something that they've done. It's not always that impressive what they've done, but they've done something, and they've tried. They've demonstrated that they really are committed to trying to do something in the area. And we understand, like, it's going to be really hard for people who don't have access to all the data that I had at Teams or we have at ESPN to do something fundamentally better than what's been done before. But you've tried, and you've showed me that you can ask interesting questions and you can develop a reasonable approach to answer them with data. And that's the kind of thing that the demonstrated skill that a couple people talk about is so important in terms of us, finding people who are we really want to have as part of our group.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, yeah.
Can we all say, just back down the line? This is something that I like to get on my soapbox about, so I'm sorry about that. But generally, if you're speaking to a hiring manager, it means you have a pretty good resume. It means that you've checked the boxes for whatever the required skills are. Congratulations, but now guess what? You're in a different round. The expectations raise a lot. And it's amazing how many people think that just because they've gotten to speak to somebody, that they don't have to provide specific examples or try to show, look, these are things I've actually done, as opposed to things that they want to do. For companies like ESPN, like Octagon, these are super, super, super competitive companies. It is not an exaggeration to say that there are 500 people for one spot, full-time internship, whatever it happens to be. So that means that every single piece of your interview needs to be on point. You need to be able to provide those specific examples. You need to be able to ask questions that make people remember you. It can't be, what is the culture like? Not that that isn't important, but I would do 8 phone interviews a day, and I would get the same question 8 times, and guess what? By number 8, I was not paying attention to my answer, nor was I really paying attention to you, because you kind of bored me. And maybe that really means I was bad at my job, but some of the burden is on you when you're one of 500 to stand out and to differentiate yourself. And I cannot stress enough the importance of that, no matter what you're interviewing for, who you're interviewing with. Be it, start with the resume. The resume is your first impression. Make it good. If every single bullet can't answer the who, what, where, why, when, don't put that bullet on there. Don't just say that you worked in analytics. Tell me what you did, how you did it, who you did it for, how you pushed the envelope.
It's well said. And first, anything on the resume is fair game. So if you went to this case competition and that just is a nice little filler for you, and we call you out on it, not call you out, but it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you've done something. Because, especially straight out of school, there's going to be often limited opportunities for you. So, if there's, say, that case competition, be able to speak to it. And if you can't speak to it or have someone call you on any given bullet point, don't include it on your resume. The other thing, and I'm not sure how much of this is going to be on the analytics side, but because a lot of the work that we do is also strategic work. And I don't know if you have all heard this, but we so many times will have someone come and say, I am a strategist, I'm a strategic thinker. And the first question we want to say is, all right, give me an example of the last time that you did something strategic, or looked at data in a strategic way, or made a strategic decision. And once again, there's going to be limited opportunities given whatever the work experience you have is going in, but if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to be able to back it up. And if you can, then that's somebody that we want to talk to for sure. But I think that's really ultimately what it is being able to differentiate yourself with being able to tell your own story, and at the same time, putting yourself on kind of the other side of the table. Is if we have an opening, it's not because we have to have 4 openings a year or whatever that number is. It's because there's a problem that we have. We have an opening because there's a need, whether it's a new account or the bandwidth of our team just isn't going to cut it for the number of clients that we're bringing in, and we need someone who can step in and solve a problem for us. And the more that you can demonstrate that you are the person to solve that problem, and you're going to make my job or my boss's job or my direct report's job easier on a daily basis, that's somebody that we want to have around.
Yeah, I agree, because it's not, I've worked in different times at bigger companies where they did just bring in, 10 MBAs a year or whatever, and they would just figure out where to put them. It's not the case anymore. I mean, if there's an opening, there's an opening for a reason, and we need work to be done. And what we do from an entry-level recruiting process, we go through the interview process. We also provide a case for folks to complete. If you're ever given the opportunity to actually to do something that you're going to turn in, really do a good job on it and make sure that it's pretty. I mean, you have to make sure that the quality is good, but I can't overemphasize how making, a high quality analysis look good, back to the Tableau example, can really set you apart. That definitely happens to us all the time. I mean, and it's not even something that would take that much more time, but it just shows that next level of caring and exemplifies that, and that's definitely what we want to see.
We're going to open it up to questions, if anybody out there's got any questions.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Lombardo, and I just wanted to thank you all for speaking to us today. My question is, and anyone can answer this, is what are your thoughts on the new Major League Baseball stat tracker?
Well, I think it's exciting, and it's an opportunity. I think it's got a long way to go. From the initial testing that's been done, it's not nearly as accurate as we'd like it to be. And we would also like to have them give us all of the data, because we like to have all the data. But it's coming, and it's part of that, the sort of player tracking movement, and that I talked about, that I just think is a tremendous opportunity for ESPN and sports analytics in general to really advance what we can do about so many things, whether it's looking at defense, and our understanding of defense in sports is very, very limited. And technologies like that are going to help us dramatically understand and value those things, so that the great defenders in the NBA, for example, Tony Allen and Draymond Green, these guys aren't going to be, are going to become superstars because we can understand and put a real value on their defense now.
Okay.
My name is David. This is for Kevin. Recently, I've been doing some work with the PR director for the Kansas City Royals, or the old one, and we did some work with MLB. And I've also been doing work for the Danbury Westerners and the NECBO. And that's kind of all happened by accident, just for like internships, or, through the university. If you had to say like a couple recommendations for me to get into baseball, that's kind of like something. And I noticed that you worked for the Diamondbacks, so I was just wondering what you could recommend.
I think both with your position as well as everyone else in your position as a student, people are willing to talk with you. And I think using, whether it's LinkedIn or the team websites as a resource, I mean, it's also not that difficult to figure out, what someone's email address is, which is for better or for worse, to do a little bit of hunting there, and reaching out and getting the conversation started with informational interviews, with both the areas that you're looking to get into, as well as areas that you may not know about as much about. Obviously, do your homework beforehand and make it worth your time and that person's time. But the more informational interviews you do, and the more times that those people can introduce you to contacts of theirs and understanding how their hiring process works, I think that goes a long way. The one other thing I would say is, if you are in the position of having an internship or a work study or some kind of program where you're able to get, say, inside the walls of an ESPN or any company for that matter, use that access to be able to take someone to lunch, meet someone for coffee that doesn't necessarily work in your department. So often, say in PR, you say, I am the PR guy, I'm just in PR, when right next to you, you may have community affairs and marketing analytics and the media buying team that all share kind of office space with you. Leverage those relationships so you don't get pigeonholed into one area because that's the first thing you jumped into when you were 19, 20, 21 years old.
And just to add on to that for a second, because I think is a great point, David Griffin, who's currently the general manager for the Cleveland Cavaliers, started with the Phoenix Suns in ad sales. So he was desperate to work in sports, in basketball, and he took any job he could get, even though what he really wanted to do was work on the personnel side. It took time, it took a lot of work, and he's a really talented guy. But you can do that. You just have to, getting in is a big deal.
Gentleman up front.
You guys have been talking a lot about professional sports primarily. What about, a lot of us have, whether it's Garmin or Fitbit or things like that, the personal fitness industry, which, could that be an opportunity for students to analyze whether it's who owns the data, to how is that data leveraged, because we also have our healthcare side of an industry and try to make sure people are as healthy as possible. And companies are now buying these kind of devices for their employees to track them and make sure they are in fact moving their butts around, so that way they have lower premiums. So where do you see that as a potential growth area in the future?
Want me to take it? I'll take it.
That's your.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I think it depends on how passionate you are and what you want to do. So, right, there's one school of thought of do anything you can and get your foot in the door in anything that's closely related and then parlay it into where you want to go. I think that can work for some people. I've certainly bounced a little bit and taken some turns that I didn't expect. But I think the other piece is figuring out what your passion is. If your passion is professional sports, you should do professional sports. Certainly the personal fitness category is big right now, and I think it's going to continue to get bigger. It's something I was maybe not articulating as well as I could have earlier when I was talking about how can we bring some of these metrics from the professional level down to you or me or whoever's wearing your new device, and also how can you make it social. But while they are certainly in the analytics space, I think they're two very different animals, and so you really need to decide for you personally if this is, what is most important to you on the career path. Is it analytics or is it sports? Because while technically that is sports, I think most people would say that personal fitness is very different and it may not meet your passion. I mean, even to go back to that cycling conversation today, I tried to steer them into more of the personal fitness category, and this entrepreneur was just very focused. This is for professional athletes. This is something that we're going to track. This is going to then spin off into swimming and skating in different categories. So it's kind of a combination of hearing what the other options are and gauging your interest, and then also charting your own course. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but.
Good.
I guess my question is more for Dr. Alomar, but you all kind of addressed it or touched on it a little. For the stubborn, old-fashioned type of person, like a Charles Barkley or someone who doesn't believe fully in analytics,
You just need a little bit more of Charles.
Yeah.
Yes,
how would you sell those type of people on it?
So working with scouts and coaches that have had virtually no experience with analytics is definitely a challenge. I think my experience has been that the sort of the Moneyball scene where the scouts hate the analytics guy, that didn't really happen for me. But what did happen is, people who weren't interested at all. What I found is that the best way to get engaged with them is to get to know them so they could trust me. Because there's no way that they've been, these people have been incredibly successful up to this point without thinking about analytics. So it's really incumbent upon me to demonstrate to them, one, that they should think about analytics, that it will help them, it'll be valuable to them, and two, that they should trust that I do analytics really well, because they're not going to understand my modeling at all. And so there has to be a level of trust there. There was a scout in Cleveland who the first year I worked with in the draft room, there was nothing that I said that registered for him at all. And it was clear that, he wasn't rude about it, it just didn't care. We worked together over the course of the year, and by the time we got to the next draft, I was giving, he ranked his power forwards, and then it was my turn, and I ranked the power forwards, and I explained why, and he said, oh, well, I better change my vote, because I want Ben's right. And, that was a great moment for me, because it was clear that not only was he, agreeing with me, which I liked, but he was engaged with me and trusted that this, advanced analysis that I had done was actually real, and his experience with my analysis over time had given him enough trust that it was worth working with.
I think that there's something to be said for that, that anyone can do regardless of what you're trying to navigate. When you're trying to establish yourself as a professional and kind of make your mark, it's all about how you sell yourself and your ideas and whatever project you're trying to work on or trying to get towards. We had that challenge at ESPN when, several years ago, when analytics first started, we had pushback from producers and from anchors who didn't understand it. And that skill set is universal, whether you're trying to pitch a startup, whether you're trying to get a job and sell yourself, right? The ability to try to figure out what the issues are in front of you, communicate a plan to solve those issues. Those are universal skills that are so important, whatever you're doing.
Good.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a grad student here. I'm always interested in, when I hear people talk about the things that you're talking about, it's like how you monetize what you do. I mean, the analytics are great. I'm sure, you feel really good about what you do at the end of the day, but how does that translate into earnings per share for Disney shareholders or Octagon shareholders? And like you talk about how your model isn't 100% accurate for Mariota, Winston, Hundley. What is it? Is it 30? Is it 20? Is it 50? And you talk about how you're, the best you can hope for it to be heard, and you just want a seat at the table. And all those things are great, but how does that seat at the table turn into earnings for your company?
So I think that a couple of things there. In terms of generating revenue for ESPN, what we hope to do is develop content that is more engaging than our competitors. We seek to develop, identify the best storylines faster than everybody else and get them in front of fans faster than everybody else. So people can have the information they want that they couldn't have by looking at anybody else.
Is there any way to measure that?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what
there
I
is.
do. So that's what we do on the media research side. Is we prove that we have more compelling content, we have more engagement. We know that on our websites we've got people that are spending like so much more time with us than they're spending with Yahoo Sports or Bleacher Report or exactly. So the engaged time, because the content is so compelling. So what we do is we take that and then we provide that in we do a lot of packaging around what we call research that sells,
Yeah.
and we work very closely with our sales department, and that turns into advertising dollars. On the other side, from something like a Watch ESPN, we can show the engagement of the content, and then we can go to our affiliate partners and say, yes, this is, we have this really great technology that's being adopted that people really want to be able to stream on their Apple TV or Xbox or any platform that they've got. So if you want to be able to provide that to your customers, then we're going to have to talk about our affiliate contract here, and that's where we're bringing the money
All
in.
right, thank you, that's a great answer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Good.
So, my name's Alex, by the way. Kind of looking at this from a marketing perspective. When you are developing these analytics and you're pushing them out to the public, do you guys have a target market in mind? Is it all sports fans? Is it certain sports fans? Are you finding that there's like an age range? What are the demographics that are involved in that?
I think there's naturally younger fans gravitate more towards new metrics than older fans, just simply because, same as the general manager who became extraordinarily successful looking at a certain set of information, the older fans have to be convinced more to think about things in a new way. It's fine. But in general, when we, you know, then there are niche markets, like 538 has a very specific kind of market, very data heavy. People, you know, like models, like process, that's 538 does that very well, and that's why our draft model is going to be on 538 as opposed to ESPN.com. But usually when we tell stories, we try and tell them in such a way that they're informative and interesting to anybody. You know, if we can explain it really well, then doesn't mean that everybody will buy into it and agree with us 100%, but they'll get something out of it. They'll get value out of it. They'll see a different perspective and maybe make them think a little bit. You know, so our goal, particularly when we do stuff for .com or for TV, it's very much for anybody, and that's a real challenge because we often have to boil some really complex things down into a 5-second lead-in for an anchor. But you know, we're trying to develop tools that are better and make it easier and easier to do that.
Any other questions? All right, if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank each of our panelists for coming today. It was really